Well, so far this month, we have went through the book of Nehemiah, we've went through the book of Ezra, and now we're going through the book of Ruth. Now, if I don't know what I was thinking, because if I had any sense about me, what we would have done, instead of the book of Ruth, we would have done the book of Esther. And the reason I say that is because Esther takes place during the time period, actually between Ezra and Nehemiah, kind of sandwiched right in there. It would have been good to do that just for that purpose, but I don't have any sense, so this is where we're at. We're in the book of Ruth, but the book of Ruth is a wonderful, wonderful study. So, we'll just enjoy it while we're here. It's only 4 chapters, but I'm sure you're probably familiar with the book. And so I just want to give you, just like we have been, an overview of the 2 chapters in which our study is on today, and just a few points. Honestly, we could teach on this book and get so much out of so many things here that we would be here forever. But I trust that I'm going to give you a few things, but you will get many things on your own. So just as an overview, what we have here is the beginning of the book of Ruth takes place in the time of the judges. So it predates where we've been at in Nehemiah and Ezra, because Nehemiah and Ezra take place after the kingdoms. The time of the judges is before the kingdoms. And so this is what time period the book of Ruth takes place. There was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes, and God would bring down judgment. And undoubtedly, what has happened here at the beginning of the book of Ruth, it's unstated, but they were going through a period of famine. And we only know that because of a little bit later on, there in the first chapter, Naomi hears that God has blessed them with food in her homeland, and so that's why she wants to go back. So evidently they had left their home in Bethlehem, Judah, to go to Moab. It's about 50 miles away because of the famine. And so the first chapter here, in the first 5 verses, we see the move to Moab, and then 3 deaths recorded, okay? The father and then the 2 sons, Elimelech, Mahlon, and Chilion, the 2 sons there. So they leave the homeland, and then they have 3 funerals. That's what essentially happens in the first 5 verses. The 2 sons got married, and then they died. And in verses 6 through 18, we see Naomi's decision to return, and then her interaction with the 2 daughters, Orpah and Ruth. And Orpah, she encourages them to go back unto their people, and Orpah kisses her and does so. Ruth says, not so. Death will only separate you and I. And so Ruth goes back to Bethlehem, Judah, with Naomi. And then the last few verses, we see Naomi and Ruth, they arrive in Bethlehem, and then so that's that. And in chapter 2, we see Ruth begins to glean. She goes out to get food for her and Naomi, and she gleans in a man's field by the name of Boaz. And then we see that in the first few verses, she goes there. And in verses 4 through 17, Boaz meets Ruth, and then Boaz blesses Ruth greatly. He allows her, not only, he tells her, he said, don't go anywhere and glean. You come here and you glean here. And then he tells his servants, make sure she is okay. You don't mess with her. And not only that, but go ahead and leave some good stuff behind too, so she has plenty. So we see that, and then the latter part of chapter 2 finishes up with Ruth's report back unto Naomi. She tells them about Boaz and how she was blessed with this abundance that she brought forth. And Naomi said, he's a kinsman redeemer. And so that's essentially the overview of the first 2 chapters. I'm going to give you just 2 things here real quick. Number 1, I want you to see Boaz's lesson unto Ruth. It's found in verse number 12. As Boaz is blessing Ruth, it says here that he said unto her, he said, the Lord recompense thy work, and a full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings thou art come to trust. So Boaz is essentially telling her, listen, God will provide and God will bless those that trust in him. Now, this is a lesson that Elimelech and Naomi didn't learn, because instead of staying in the land of promise in which God had told them to, they went Instead of walking by faith, they walked by sight. They experienced the famine, and they figured that they were going to be better off in Moab. But let me tell you what, the safest place to be, even when you're experiencing trials, even when you're going through hard times, the safest place to be is in the will of God. And they walked away from the will of God, went to Moab, and then you see what happened. And then so God takes care of those that put their faith in Him. This is a lesson that Boaz taught Ruth there, and in verse number 12 of chapter 2. And then secondly, Naomi blamed God. You see that both in chapter 1, this is verses 13 and verse number 20 and 21. She's blaming God for the things that befell them. And notice the wording there in verse number, I'll read 20 it's found in 21. Verse number 20, it says, and she said unto them, call me not Naomi, call me Mara, which means bitter. She's bitter. And she says, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. She's blaming God here. She said, I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. You know what the problem was? She went out. That was the problem. She was full. She was blessed by God, but she walked away with her husband. They walked away from God. And of course, trouble befell them. It wasn't anybody's fault. Certainly wasn't God's fault. Listen, God is a just God. It wasn't God's fault that these things had befallen her. If it was anybody's fault, it was her fault and her husband's. So there's just a couple nuggets, but man, there is so much in the book of Ruth. Of course, we're just in the first two chapters. We'll be in the last two chapters tomorrow, but I encourage you, take time in this book and look at all the wonderful lessons that God can bless you with, and you won't be sorry for it. So that's our study for today. God bless you, and I hope you have a great day.